All right, we're getting down to the wire. Carsten Schürmann is another friend of the village and veteran of the voting village. He is a professor at the University of Copenhagen, and he has been doing very interesting work. And again, is one of the speakers bringing us an international perspective to an unfortunately much too U.S.-centric conference. So I'm very glad he was able to make it. Travel is, of course, much harder these days from outside the U.S. So please join me in especially warmly welcoming Carsten back to the village.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm German-born, American-raised. I got my PhD from Carnegie Mellon. I was a professor at Yale for a little while, and now I reside in Denmark. And it's actually kind of fun when you do election work to be in a small country which has a very good democracy. Nobody considers you as a threat. And so I've actually taken the opportunity to travel around the world with the Carter Center, the National Democratic Institute, as an election delegate, as an election observer, and I have collected lots of experiences from this. And so what I want to do in my talk is I want to actually kind of translate some of the experiences to the American context. So it's not just like international, but it's also, it's also American. So I want to talk about the weaponization of voting channels. So what the heck is a voting channel? And so mail-in voting is, for example, a voting channel. And so here you see from Pennsylvania, the last election, 2020, I think it's the 2020 election, not the last one, 2020. It's very small. It says someplace, it must have been either late an election night or even one of the following days that the votes for Trump, he was in the lead first with 700,000, then he was in the lead with 160,000. And then when you go to the Wikipedia nowadays, he was not in the lead, was in the lead with minus 80,000. And now, my question is, what does this kind of information do to public confidence? And so I'm actually relating a little bit to my previous speaker. Public confidence is really, really important. And, it is, of course, important to have correct elections. It's good to have elections with integrity. It is good to have, elections that preserve the privacy of the vote. But what is really critical about elections is that they are trusted. And I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I distilled my vision down to this little sentence, that in a society we have different stakeholder groups that have all opposing interests. And the election is that's what it is. It's a peaceful solution, not a violent one. It's not where you kind of come out with guns and try to hit the others. No, it's a peaceful solution to a civic conflicts between these stakeholder groups on who governs whom. Who has the power in the country? And so you see in this, it's not explicitly written, but there's the acceptance of all of the stakeholder groups that they are living under, even that they might not have voted for that particular candidate. But they must trust it, they must have confidence in it, they must accept the results. And one of our colleagues, Josh probably knows who it was, I forgot now who it was, when you were, who was it? You have to convince the loser to accept the result. That is the most important part.
I think it was Ron Rivest.
Ron Rivest, yes. So that is the really important part. So when it comes to these voting channels, it's like we have different voting channels also in the United States. There's in-person voting, there's mail-in voting, there's maybe mobile voting, postal voting, advanced voting, drop-off voting, Wakava voting, embassy voting. Each one's a different voting channel. And what we have seen, the voting channels somehow provide different results. So there was when the paper ballots were counted on election night in 2020, there was one result, and the paper ballots were counted, must have been a different result because it changed the outcome of the election. So my hypothesis is that the voting channels that deliver different results, they can actually be weaponized to attack public confidence. And that is a very, very kind of scary thought. And I've never thought about it. You know, in this community, we talk a lot about like voting machines. We talk about like, you know, how do we do audits to kind of convince people that the result is right? But psychologically, what is going on if there are two channels? And that's exactly what, and maybe not exactly, but it is connected to what John was saying. What's happening? And so what you can get is you can get disinformation, or, you know, as it's sometimes called, false narratives, which I actually start liking as a word. Disinformation, you don't really know, but false narratives is very clear. Somebody talks and interprets data in a way that it shouldn't. It could have something to do with demographic distribution. Right? For example, people in the cities, they vote in a different way than people in the rural countries. And there are more people in the cities that are actually using mail-in voting than the people in the rural parts. Or there can be ill-intended voting channel politicization, where political parties actually know about this and they use this kind of information in order to, you know, use it as a political mean. So this means actually the mechanics of running elections becomes a part of the adversary's activities. That is kind of a strange thing, because so far we always think about political parties and elections are just a mechanical thing. You collect some votes, you count them up, and then you hope everyone trusts them. But this seems to indicate that actually now political parties, if they're aware of this, they can actually use the voting channels and talk about them in special ways. Now, I don't want to talk about the United States because I don't have enough information. It might be that there are researchers that have done a lot of research about this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a small neutral country that John also mentioned, which is Estonia. And I've been to Estonia decryption ceremonies of internet voting at least 4 times. 2 times as an election observer or a member of the election expert team of the OSCE ODIHR missions in 2019 and 2023. And here in 2023, I have observed certain things that I'd like to share with you. And you have to use your imagination to kind of see how do you translate this into the US context. Okay, so this is your homework that we have to do. So first of all, let me give you a graph of how trust is distributed in internet voting. So maybe I should tell you first, internet voting is an alternative voting channel. So people can still vote on paper, but they can also vote on the internet. In this election in 2023, 50% of the votes were actually cast, 50.05% were cast over the internet. So every second vote came over the internet. And so this is, of course, many, many votes. And you see here, there are people who actually are looking in trust and they're measuring trust because they're very concerned about internet voting in Estonia. So they're measuring trust over time. And you can see here, you know, it goes up and down. At the very beginning, they started in 2005, local elections, the first one. Okay, so they were like 65% trusted it. And then they did it again, 2007, and people thought it was really great. At the beginning was only a certain group that voted, and more people voted. But then there was the international community who said, like, you know, you have to actually do crypto in the right way. You have to just double envelope is maybe not good enough, and so on. And then in 2013, 2014, they started actually, you know, renovating and improving the technology. And I think you can see that the trust slightly went up. So you can already see 2023 is not in this graph. You can already estimate where it might end up because this is why I'm giving the talk, okay? But I'm not giving it away yet. So now, how does internet voting actually work? And I think internet voting is a very complicated way because you collect a lot of stuff and over the internet, little datagrams of encrypted information, possibly, you know, accompanied by zero-knowledge proofs where you can check certain things and so on. But at the end, there's a place where there's a computer that crunches all of those numbers and it displays the result. And I actually imagine that mail-in voting is a very similar kind of experience where there's all of these letters coming into a place and they're being fed into these counters. And then at the end, you know, you can do your audit, of course, but there comes some result on the screen. Okay, so on this voting day at 9 o'clock, I'm sorry, it's the European way of writing time, so 9:03 p.m., vote data was included, and that it's a big room, you know, all of the political parties are there, and they're all watching this, and there is the master of ceremonies is somebody brings him USB sticks, he plugs it in, and then they're going to do certain things with this. So 9:03, data is included. Then at 9:14, the data is cleansed, and the data cleansing is also a very funny operation, which in internet voting is very common. In order to avoid coercion, voter coercion, people are allowed to vote as many times as they want, and only the last vote counts. I mean, in paper ballots, you have never seen this, right? There's nobody who can kind of vote several times, puts a ballot into the ballot box, and only the last ballot counts. How would you know? I mean, the whole construction is so that you can't actually figure this out. And so the cleansing here uses data from the polling stations and removes data from the ballot box. All but the last ballot actually is supposed to survive. Now, how is that verifiable? In this room, there's not only the people operating, but there's a second group of people, and this is the verification people. And the verification people, they are observing and they're checking that the proofs are correct, and then they implement their own implementation and rerun this and so on. It's very complicated. It's a huge, huge process that takes many, many hours in order to get this done. So at the end, so the cleansing, yes, 9:14, it was done. Then comes mixing. So this is like the shuffling of the ballot box. So in order to kind of sever the vote from the voter's identity, it's another step at 9:25. Now, the reason why this election was special compared to the other reasons is because this entire process took a long, long time. And why was that? It's the first time that they actually expected the polling stations to report on who voted so that they can remove the duplicates. Also the last vote. You can overwrite your final vote actually on paper, and then your internet vote is basically overwritten. So you need data for this, and this has to be reported. It takes a long time. So it used to be that the data actually was included into the count. The internet voting data was included into the count immediately. But here, it took a long time. Okay, so 9:25, they kind of digitally shuffle this, and then they decrypt it. And here you see two gentlemen. The gentleman sitting there at the, it was from a company that actually did the verification. And then, when you turn on the TV, these were about approximately the preliminary election results. In preparation of the talk, I couldn't find the real number, so I made up some stuff. It says it down there. It's made up stuff. The only thing which is important, that is the blue bar is very, very high, and the yellow bar is not this high. So now comes the story that I really want to get to. That is, the blue bar is a political party who has told their voters, do not vote on the internet. Your vote will be stolen. And so people, lots of people voted on ballot papers. And so this is the result at 11:10 of the results that only included ballot papers. And then we can already imagine what actually happened. So there was some signature verification, and then there was and the results were uploaded to the main server, and the result changed from 1 second to the other. And with the election in 2020 here, it took a long time for all of these mail-in votes to count, and there was a lot of talk on the media. But here it was from 1 second to the other. The people were already celebrating, and they were number one, and suddenly they lost half of their votes. How could that be? And the reason why that was is, at least that's my personal opinion, is because the political party has conducted so much advertisement and has used this voting channel and politicized it, and has told their people, do not vote on the internet, your vote will be stolen, your vote will not count for the people you want. And so this has been a change in the way how actually elections have been conducted in the past. Even I, who has been 4 times at the ceremony, the reason why we all, as audience, actually took confidence that this was the right result, because the internet results approximately reflected and mirrored the paper results. And we looked at it, and it didn't make any change. And we got confidence out of this, that this might have been okay. But now, what happened to the confidence? And so you can already imagine that this party which was affected went to the Supreme Court the very next day and said, like, there has been extensive fraud, and something has to be done against this. And on March the 9th, 2023, the courts rejected it. And in this newspaper article, you actually see that it was rejected because of formal reasons, basically. They didn't file in time, too late, forgot something else. So the court decided not to actually touch this. So now there's a colleague of mine, Mikkel Solvak. He is at the University of Tartu, and he's a political scientist. I'm a computer scientist. The political scientists all make these funky graphs, and I think it's very interesting. So I have used that graph. And so in this graph, you see trust in internet voting over time, okay? And so you can see this is for each line is one party, and the party affected was the blue party. The one that goes straight down, these are the people who said you cannot trust internet voting, don't do it. For the other parties, it was the trust has increased. Now, he also did some user studies at the end to evaluate in what are the effects on the trust of the people. And here, for the first time in a long time, it really went. There's a significant drop in trust. You have to imagine 50% of the people actually use this voting channel, and so this is not good, because when you have these voting channels and they're being politicized, it seems to be that there is some evidence it can really negatively affect trust. And when we zoom out and go to a more broader context of a geopolitical context of what other nation states are actually interested in, they might not be interested in changing one ballot to something else or remove a person from a data from the voter list. No, I think what a target actually could be for some of these nation states is actually to destroy or at least weaken confidence in the electoral system. And that is something which I am very, very concerned about, especially because trust is easy to destroy, but it is damn difficult to rebuild. And that sets a society back many, many decades. Okay, and there's also other studies that Michael did. And here on the last thing, you see basically along this political spectrum, the extremes don't believe in it anymore, right? They are losing trust. There is a polarization of trust in society, and that has also a significant effect. And that is because of these things with the voting channels. So when we return to the US elections, I live in Europe. I see this in the newspaper. I try to kind of look in all different medias from all different political spectrum. I don't look at social media, in part because I don't do this stuff. So there's a lot of talk about mail-in voting and, presidential orders on this and that and this and that. And it seems to be it's understood. This kind of voting channel could actually become a weapon of trust destruction if done cleverly. I don't want to give anyone any stupid ideas, but I also think that if people already have these ideas, the community has to prepare for it and understand what is it that we can actually do against it. So I think we need something like voting channel security. And this is a word which I've just coined for this talk. I'm not entirely clear what it is, but it is a different kind of security. It's not ballot security, it's voting channels. Like, we have different channels next to each other. How do you actually protect them? Okay, and so one idea, these are all ideas, they are all kind of completely harebrained, and they're also not implementable, is you don't do separate counting. You don't publish results anymore according to different voting channels, but you hide information. I think a little bit what Marilyn Marks talked about this morning, with actually publishing you can publish too much. And once you publish too much, you can actually misuse this data that you have actually published. Another option is no preliminary results. You just don't publish any preliminary results. And I think in some countries, so for example, in Greenland, the only election results you're allowed to publish in TV is the final results. No estimates, nothing. It is the final result, full stop. And all voting channels have been kind of combined already at the time. you could allow only one uniform homogeneous voting channel. And that probably is, many states in the United States really depend on mail-in voting. Some states have very complicated ballot forms. For others, it's convenience. So this is, I don't think, implementable, quite frankly. But it's one of my harebrained ideas. Okay, you might need new trusted institutions that actually look into this, and they have statements. They do analysis, they do risk limiting audits on the different voting channels independently, and people take trust out of them. I do not know if this actually would work at all, or if the false narratives that you could spin out of voting channels misuse would actually kind of destroy trust to such an extent that you couldn't actually reconstruct it, not even with institutions. Or channel dependent risk limiting audits I mentioned already. Yes. So I'm also a little bit too fast, talk too fast, I'm sorry about this. But my conclusion is, that I believe that this voting channel security is actually necessary to achieve peaceful solution. And the emphasis on peaceful, because the moment a political party goes to the Supreme Court and kind of contests the election because of whatever reason, that is the first step to this not being a peaceful transfer of power anymore. And of course, I have not followed, I have to admit, I have not followed what happened after 2023 to the different parties. But it is peaceful. It is peaceful. But nevertheless, this is, I think, another puzzle piece in this election security game. And we have never really looked at it, what actually happens with these voting channels. And with this, I'd like to stop, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
You may not know this, but why would they allow multiple voting?
So the question was, why do they allow multiple votings? The idea is coercion resistance. So when you are actually, when you vote on paper, usually you vote in a very controlled environment. You get one ballot, you fill it out, you go home. But when you are sitting at home, you might be, your partner might actually force you to vote a particular way. Or there's somebody next to you, threatening to break your kneecaps. And so the idea of many of those systems is that you are allowed to vote several times. There is something about like last-minute coercion, and if I were a coercer, which I'm not, but I could imagine that if you do the last 5-minute coercion, then you can't re-vote either. So there's a lot of problems with this as well. But yes, re-voting is one of the ways in order to mitigate coercion. Yes.
Jeff, instead of looking at the lack of trust as a bad thing, why don't you just look at it as a good thing? Because ideologically, the opposite. If you don't have a lack of trust, you're not keeping the election officials, held to account. You're not keeping the pressure for them to reform the election system to have more transparency, right? So, from my perspective, a lack of trust is a good thing because it puts pressure to make the election system in general more and more transparent to address those concerns, right? So when we talk about a weaponization of information, of vulnerabilities, I would say, hey, it's not really weaponizing, it's the voter is saying to the election officials and to the government, hey, we don't believe in the election results. It's not their fault. I would say it's the government and the state legislatures to address those concerns. What do we have to do to build up more trust? So I would say instead of looking at a lack of trust as a bad thing, look at it as a good thing, as pressure to.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think you can. My comments you can also interpret exactly in these ways. It is like me standing here and saying like there's something funny going on if you do it like this. I have traveled to some countries. There's no trust especially in African countries. There's no trust in election commissions whatsoever. That is also not very pleasant. I live in Denmark, which is there's a high trust in election commissions. There's the election commission actually in the Copenhagen municipality is under the what's it called the spare time department that looks after playgrounds and elections, so that you can imagine what kind of level of trust you have in these countries. I have to admit, I really enjoy living in a country where the trust is this high, but it is also, the elections are extremely well organized in this. And there's also mail-in voting, but these are not counted separately, and they are counted exactly at the same time with all of the other ballots. All of the letters will have to have arrived at the time of closing at the election. The letters will all be opened during the election, counting on election night, and the results that are being published are the final results. So I think you're absolutely right. I'm not sure, I still think that trust is the most important part.
Fundamental ideological way of looking at the problem. So there's one theme I see in a lot of these laws. Oh, it's a bad thing, but on the opposite side, you have a fundamental ideological argument to say, no, wait a minute, that's not such a bad thing, right?
Yeah, well taken. I mean, we have the luxury to have distrust, and that's very good. Doug, you had a question.
I'm going to talk about this in the next talk.
Okay. So stay here. Doug is talking about the same thing in the next, or continuing along those same lines in the next talk. Any other questions? Yes.
And can you speak up a little bit about the legality and trust and the research? People lose trust and then it shifts them to vote in person. How does that really change the election or how does that really
So this is a good question. So the question was, if I understood it correctly, so if the voting channel is not good, what stops people from actually migrating to the other channels and then everything is fine? And that can very well happen. But there might be a difference in opinion between the government, who was working hard on buying an internet voting system, and their greater plan is to actually remove the other voting channel, like in Estonia. I don't think in Estonia, which is also funny because in Estonia you have both voting channels and they're there to stay. So you can freely choose between the two channels. We don't know how the story here is going to develop. Maybe all of this is a non-issue and it goes away because people have so much trust in the officials that it's a non-issue. But it depends also on the behavior of the parties and the interpretation of what they find and how they present it to their own voters. I think that is also not to be ignored. Yes?
I'm just curious, the Estonia example, was that your sudden way of discussing the U.S. 2020 election? Because it's ugly. I mean, this was just by coincidence. I mean, it's 2020. The country told their voters, don't trust me and vote. It's like,
I did not know that to that extent. I did not know that. And I have given a previous version of this talk where I only talked about the Estonian case, but I thought I'm at DEF CON. There's a lot of American, I'm going to put this into context. And I have actually not thought about what, I have thought about what is the main, why is there such a big difference in the voting channels that were used in the 2020 elections. And maybe it was exactly that, but I did not follow up as it. It was. Okay.